Dr. Jacko, Dr. Jacko, Dr. Jack. What do we have today? You feel like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde the last couple of days, but what
Yeah,
do we
I've
have
been
for
I've been
today?
called worse, Neil. So you
Okay.
can't offend me. Jacko, Roscoe. I've had all sorts of names over the years. Um, no, today I saw a news report that the city of I don't have any huge specific details, but the city of San Francisco is apparently filing a lawsuit or considering a lawsuit against all the big food corporations because of this ultra high processed food that's out there. And, we've talked about this a number of times. I mean, one of my key fundamental principles and goals when I'm seeing a patient is to work on their diet and, their weight. And most of this, and we've talked about this before, the struggles when you're traveling. You're traveling and you're trying to maintain a good diet and you're trying to stop and get something good to eat and you got a 12-hour drive and the only thing that's out there is all crap. It's all fast food, processed
Right.
food, bags of chips, whatnot. But I saw some of I'm not sure which companies are going to be involved, but it's something that's starting and it's really, I think, going to be the tip of the iceberg. They always say, as California goes, so goes the country. Um, and, I remember, I think I've heard, Kraft, Nabisco, Heinz, a lot of the standard companies, and going against them for the ultra processed foods, all the additives, all the chemicals that have never been food. And as a result, I mean, you've seen over the years, if you look at a photo from 1970, whatever, of people on the beach, and there's no obese people. I mean, everybody is thin, in
Yeah.
shape, wearing Speedos and, et cetera, but people are fit or people at a food counter. There's all sorts of, photos like that in like 1972, 2002 or 2022. And the obesity rate has just blossomed during this period. And the thing that's changed the most is food and diet. And the transition from home cooked food by prepared food by small little diners and restaurants that were family owned and operated, and the food came from the grocery store, came from somewhere that was, came from farmers, came from actual people. They were using butter, they were serving bacon, they were serving steak. And there were no heavy people, very few heavy people. And now the transition, they went to corn oil, and even like McDonald's. You remember when McDonald's had the switch from, I believe it was beef tallow that they used, which is a
Mhm.
natural product. They went from beef tallow, and they mandated that McDonald's had to use corn oil. Well, corn oil, from what I understand, it is so highly processed, it goes through such a procedure to turn corn. All these, they classify them as seed oils. There's a number of oils that were, they sound like they should be healthy, vegetable oil. Vegetables are healthy, right? But by the time you take the vegetables and you expose them to, high toxic, high heat, pressure, all sorts of, the process that it takes to get oil out of corn, um, makes it, basically unpalatable. It's not food anymore. And then, so a lot of these things that were touted, margarine is another big one. The switch, I can't believe it's not butter. Well, you can't believe it's
Right.
not butter because it's not butter and it's not good for you. Um, the rate of arteriosclerosis, they call it the word that a lot of physicians in the functional medicine field and arena, the word that they use is metabolic disease. And when I was in medical school and residency, we used to call it Honda. And Honda stood for hypertensive, obese, um, okay, with the N, and diabetes, arteriosclerosis, so it was this accumulation of illnesses that came together in a package, you know.
Right.
And another a big concept that we were taught early on is this idea of Occam's razor. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard of
Occam's
Occam's
razor?
razor. Yeah.
It's a tool for solving a problem. That if you see, in healthcare, it's a patient. If you see a patient who has this very strange and unusual or rare disease, and this very strange and unusual rare disease, and this strange and unusual rare disease, it's not likely that they just have, ooh, they happen to get that by chance. Ooh, they've also happened to get that. Statistically, it's statistically, impossible to just randomly get two or three combined diseases into one. It's
Right.
likely that there is a root cause at the bottom of the pyramid that's causing all these problems to flourish in the meantime. And that's what they're grouping these, instead of Honda was just a ghetto word, a street word that physicians used to describe this. But now they're clumping it into metabolic disease. And metabolic disease is those three things. And it's usually caused by an excess of sugar. The sugar intake that we have is incredible. So it's high sugar, it's the processed food, it's the toxins that our bodies are exposed to. It's the high insulin level. If insulin is a hormone, and insulin has a shelf life of about 12 hours, more or less. So if you eat a candy bar, you eat a potato, whatever it is that you eat, and your pancreas secretes the insulin, that insulin will be with you for 12 hours. And insulin's job is to make fat. Insulin's not a bad thing. It does what it's supposed to do. It does its function. And its function is to take sugar and take it out of the bloodstream to lower your sugar level and push it into the cells. Well, if you go and eat before the 12 hours has elapsed, your body's going to, squirt out a little more insulin, a little more insulin, a little more insulin. Well, the average American, we talked about this when we talk about fasting. The average American never goes through 12 hours of fasting. You're eating or drinking beer till midnight, you go to sleep, you wake up at 7, you have a breakfast, you have eggs, pancakes, cereal, whatever. So you get another squirt. So most Americans have insulin in their system 24/7. So that's like being drunk 24/7. If you have always
Right.
alcohol in your system, it's the same thing, only, we have an insulin addiction. The average American is addicted to insulin and they crave the food. The food in, it stimulates cravings on this insulin spectrum. So, you're constantly eating. So you're constantly taking sugar and putting it into your cells. Well, a couple things happen. One, your body gets used to insulin, so you need more of it to do the job, just like an alcoholic. Two, how much insulin can your pancreas make? Especially as you get older. There's not an endless supply of insulin that you can keep squirting out of your pancreas.
Mm-mm.
Eventually, as you get older, all your glands, your testicles, all your glands, your pancreas have a limit. And as you get older, they get a little more dried up, they get a little more unhealthy. They can't squirt out an infinite amount of insulin. So, either you can't produce the insulin or the insulin doesn't have the same effect, and that's where diabetes takes place. And then you got to, either go to one of the metformin type drugs, or you go on to insulin again. And it's like I always say that when patient comes in and says, "Doc, and I have all these analogies, Neil, and it helps and helps patients to really understand what's going on. If you went to your doctor and said, you know what, doc, I used to drink 3 or 4 beers a night, and that got me a nice buzz, put me to sleep. But now I'm drinking 3 or 4 beers a night, and I don't get the same effect." And the doctor's like, okay, let's write your prescription. Let's go up to 5 or 6 beers a night. That's kind of what we do with insulin.
Yep.
They're saying like, I can't control my sugar naturally. I need more insulin. And at some point, if someone becomes insulin dependent, um, you give the insulin, and then the pancreas shuts off. So it forms this, it's all involved in this metabolic illness, this metabolic disease, where your body is constantly pushing fat or pushing sugar into the cells and creating fat. The cells get bogged down. The mitochondria stop functioning properly. All the cells stop functioning. They're clogged. It's like the movie Wall-E, where the garbage is just piling up in your body. And you've got free radicals, you've got what they call oxidative stress, which is it's toxins. Oxidative stress, I think of peroxide, hydrogen peroxide, the formula OH is the oxidative stress. It's a stress from the metabolism of all this excess eating, excess sugar, excess food, a lot of it that's not food. So your body's loaded with toxins, your cells don't work, your brain is foggy, your testicles don't work, all the functions start, and that's what's happened to the American person, the American patient. Um, and a lot of it is directly tied to the food, the constant advertising of food. You can't have a Super Bowl party without a seven-layer dip and Doritos and Pepsi and Coke and all these. And it's the food messaging. You can advertise for food, but you can't advertise for beer anymore. And, cigarettes. And that's what's happening with this lawsuit is that it's putting food and these food companies and processed food companies into the spotlight of you better explain yourself, Lucy. You've
Right.
got a lot of splaining to do. Um, did you know about the damage that this food caused? Did you know about the effects that this food is happening? And we've been talking about, like I said, if I went to residency 30 years ago and we talked about, what was metabolic illness back then. Um, and that was in the 90s, and that's when it was starting. The 70s, if you look at the timeline, from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, we were starting to see metabolic disease in the 90s, and it was food related. We didn't necessarily tie it to that. We tied it to a lot of personal behavior. And, a lot of times when I hear these lawsuits against McDonald's or whoever, I think I was always like, well, it's your choice. It's your choice if you eat McDonald's. So just like it's your choice if you smoke cigarettes, it's your choice if you drink alcohol.
Right.
It's your choice that you eat this food. But now it's so ubiquitous. The family restaurants are all put out of business because of the big chains. You can't find, I mean, if you do, I've got this little diner that I go to near the office that I love. I love those little, silver car diners where it's family
Right.
owned and you got eggs and like, throw some extra onions on there. You can order your food to taste, as opposed to just getting a something that's flipped and thrown into a plastic box. But it's going to be interesting to see how this turns out, what happens with it. Um, the tobacco settlement was huge for a lot of states. And, if California succeeds, the dominoes are going to fall and a number of other states may get on board with this. And this could be massive. But I mean, I hope it wakes these companies up and gets them to start, distributing actual food products, which is actual something your body can metabolize. So it's going to be interesting.
It's going to be really interesting. Do you think it's going to happen? Do you think that what they're saying is that there'll be a
I,
lawsuit or there's
you
going to be
know,
a lot of problems happening soon?
right. I'm apolitical. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Try to, I, st-
You're smart. Be
I look at the,
apolitical.
I look at the issues. I don't buy the whole cow. It's like you could either buy this cow or that cow. I pick and choose, and I think that's where my brain is. And I'm more of a scientist, Neil. I don't have an allegiance to any one belief or what have you. But so I think it's going to be in the political arena. I think it's going to be in the legal arena, whether there's and who's running the courts. But I think RFK is bringing a lot of this to attention, whether you love him or hate him. And I mean, I grew up. My parents were Kennedy, were Kennedy Democrats growing up. And Kennedy even says it himself. He goes, "This is a Democratic idea," but he's working for a Republican administration now. So it's very interesting, and like I said, it's politics. So who knows where things are go? It's government involvement, it's economics, But I think they're valid. I think a lot of people. That's why I made the change career-wise. That you can only there's only so much you can do with people as a surgeon. As a surgeon, you can do surgery, but it doesn't necessarily make the patient any healthier, any happier, and he doesn't add to their quality of life or longevity of life. Um, so we're limited, physicians are limited. And I think a lot of physicians, Adrienne Towson that we interviewed last week, um, she said the same thing. It's like there's only so much you can do, and you feel hamstrung, you feel handcuffed on what you can do. The insurance companies drive what you do. So people are
Right.
frustrated. Where it goes, I don't know, but I think we're going to hear a lot more about it before it either gets settled, either becomes huge. Um, I don't imagine it's going to peter out because there's so much, you do a lot of the same things, Neil. You do this biohacking, you try to eat well,
Yeah.
you try to sleep well. All these things it's really gaining a groundswell moving forward towards
And did you
health.
see the alcohol thing that came out? We should talk about that next week. Only 54% of America wants to drink alcohol now. That's
Yeah,
unreal.
yeah.
That's because of if we talked about cannabis, it'll be a good conversation about cannabis and what our thoughts are on
Mhm.
that, and think of what CBD versus THC. And we don't know the long-term effects, and everyone has jumped the ship away from alcohol to that because you feel better the next day than if you go ahead and drink 20 beers. You get, use THC or CBD. Next morning, you're not in a horrible shape. But
Right.
but there's still not enough
But it's
research out there.
right, but yeah, there's not enough research on it. And what are the long term? You're substituting one crutch for another crutch. You know, it's a highly complicated issue. But I think I'm excited that at least we're starting to break the seal on holding these companies accountable for what it is that they're pushing out there. And a lot of the substance and the chemicals that are in our food, the dyes, all that stuff, aren't present in Europe, and they're much healthier. And you hear people when they travel to Europe, they're like, I've been gluten sensitive my whole life, and I just spent a month in Europe, and they're gnawing on a piece of French bread or something. They're like, bread does not have the same effect on me in Europe because it's not the bread, it's the stuff that's in the bread, you know. And you got to read the labels, but who can read the labels anymore? I look at those things. I don't know what they do. If you don't know what cannabis does or what alcohol does to your body, how are you going to know what all these chemicals do to your body? They're not tested. And I said, I think, if you look globally at from the 30,000-foot view of American health, not American health care. American health care is a different thing. That's insurance. That's financing. That's who's going to pay for this bad health. And, patients are ultimately assuming the cost of their bad health. And it's going to be it's going to be a case of who's responsible for your bad health. Is it your free will and your choices that have led to this obesity and this metabolic disease that you put on yourself?
Right.
Or is it the nonsense, the marketing, the pushing, the limited supply of actual real food, or the you can't afford real food? I mean, I go to the grocery store, I try to eat good, eat well. Um, then you get to the bill, you're like, I
Yeah.
got this
Someone said
bag
the
here.
prices have gone down. I don't believe it. I'm not on healthy food. I think unhealthy food they've gone down. I don't think on healthy food, man, because
Yeah, I know.
it's like whoa. And I
Yeah,
try to
I'm
eat
just glad
healthy.
that I said
Yeah.
I'm not a pro. Like I said, I'm more a social observer of things. I try not to take sides because inevitably
I'm
you're
never gonna take sides.
inevitably you're going
I'm
to be
gonna care about bottom line is me, not.
yeah, inevitably you take sides, inevitably you're going to be wrong 50% of
And
the
then
time.
and 50% of people are gonna hate you. So you might as well have 100% of people love you or try to do that.
Yeah, I don't really care about people loving me. I'm concerned about my health. I'm concerned about my children, my
I
family,
mean,
my patients.
there's such a different outlook in all these different things versus the Food Drug Administration versus all these different things. And that's the process you have to do. And that goes into your mental health. But I'd like to have that conversation on alcohol versus the new trend. What do you think that's going to do for people when you see them, Dr. Jack, when you're in your 80s and they're coming to the Ultimate Men's Movement, and then say, I mean, men's clinic when you're in your 80s, and they come here to you and they are in better shape and are healthier. That's
Yeah, I don't,
potentially what's happening with the
I need
younger
to know, I
kids.
need to learn more, I guess, about we should try and find a guest, someone who's an expert. I can't speak that I'm an expert on THC, CBD.
I have
Um,
somebody, but
I'm
he's
not
hard
sure
to get, but
anyone,
I can find someone.
I'm
That'd be
not
a
sure if
great.
someone really is, but if there's someone who has some actual scientific proof
Yeah, I had a
for
company
or
that was on my
against,
show
or
who was
someone who's neutral on this
yeah,
subject, just brings the
yeah.
facts. I'd prefer to find someone who doesn't have a strong
Yeah, because
alliance, you know,
they
a
have something
bias.
in there in the play. All right, go to the ultimatemensclinic.com or follow on the Ultimate Men's Movement on social media, and make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this podcast, especially the videos, because you never know where they're going to end up being the next day.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Dr.
We
Jack.
cover some great topics
Yeah,
all over the board.
absolutely. All right,
Very
all
relevant.
right. That was a special.